on the air finally after some technical difficulties with YouTube. Super frustrated. I'm so sorry for everybody. This is a different link than what was sent out previously. Just the way it works, unfortunately. I had made a link a week ago, or a couple days ago, whatever, and it just doesn't let you access it from. I couldn't access it from my computer. I couldn't access it from my phone, and then the live came and went really quick in like a second. So here we are. We're talking about the strength training fundamentals. Um, what better way to start this live with a little bit of fire in my heart right now? But I wanted to first talk about kind of the foundations of our body, of our molecular makeup, of our structure, and we think of our bodies as like brick houses, and people think of like the gym as layering a brick each day. That is a nice metaphor, but in actuality, if you think about architecture, the way that our um, bodies work is our structural integrity is because of tension. So it's called a tensegrity structure. So instead of you feeling like we have this base and this platform and we're building on it with brick and brick and brick, it's actually like a bunch of sticks held together by rubber bands. Because that's really what we are. We have a bunch of bones, we have skeleton, we have muscle, and it's the fact that we have constant tension. So the fact that I have something pulling me forward, left, right, back, gravity's holding me down, that's what gives my uh, structure integrity. So let's first talk a little bit about our bones, our muscle, and water. So our bones make up about 15% of a person's total weight, and our muscle makes up about 40% of a total person's weight. Um, and then everyone probably knows this statistic: water is about 60% of our body weight. Now, the reason this is so important is because even if you're looking at a pyramid of the foundations of performance, um, your bottom, your foundation, your rock, so to speak, is nutrition. It's what we eat. It's what we consume, so that our body can be at its optimal um, strength and sturdiness and structure, right? And then so it can function accordingly. And now the reason I bring up water and hydration is because all of our cells are going to have some layer of fluid. When I have that fluid appropriately, um, you know, when I'm at the right levels of hydration, it's going to aid in my performance. It's going to aid in my strength. It's going to aid in better firing through my system. Even something as 3% dehydration can deter an individual or an athlete's performance. Now, the reason that I believe that this is so critical is not only because water is such an important transport molecule in our bodies. Think of our body as like its own little universe. We got to be able to transport things across the system, but you can't compress a liquid. So when I'm worried about structural integrity of my system, and I want strong cells, I want a strong muscle, I want sturdiness and stability in my system, hydration is going to play a crucial role in being able to maintain that tension without compression. Okay. And that's why you can feel yourself when you're dehydrated, you feel yourself collapse versus being able to stand up strong. You lose, you're losing electrolytes as well. So there's probably a lot of other nuances that play a role. But the reason I'm talking about this is because this is an absolute fundamental of strength training. Whether you're trying to lose weight, build muscle, get stronger, perform better in your specific sport, or even rehab. Actually, no, we'll say rehab for because that goes into specifics. Um, you're gonna need to have a foundation of nutrition before we head into getting any results out of the work we do in the gym. But that being said, um, moving on to beyond the nutrition side, a major fundamental of strength training is mobility. That's why you'll see even the greats that are out there right now. One guy's like Toro Kitty. It's like Torokhity, and then Sonny Webster. These are Olympic lifters who are just talking about mobility because they recognize it's not always a strength problem. That's always people's first thought, but it's absolutely mobility because um, so many joints have to collapse in say a squat, and so many joints have to work together in a deadlift. And if my muscles can't work together, then I'm going to get compensation. I'm going to get poor movement patterns. I'm going to add fitness on top of dysfunction. It's a famous Gray Cook quote. Um, but this is this is why we're talking about strength training and specifically bringing up barbell work because so many people go into isolation work. They work out their calves, they work out their thighs, they work out their core, they work out their arms, they work out their chest, they work out their back. But rarely do people actually um, systemically address all those muscles together in one function. So that's why the squat, the deadlift, the clean, the overhead press, the jerk are so beneficial because you're taxing your whole system. Would you like to touch up on that, Eric? We have Eric here, by the way. He's our in-house expert. He has his master's in strength and conditioning, and he has. You see that bookshelf behind him? It's empty because he has all the books on his nightstand next to his bed because the dude literally like eats, sleeps, and breathes textbooks all the time. So that's why I have him on here. He's absolutely my ace up my sleeve. He's where I gain all the insight and science behind some of the stuff that we learn in the field or in the gym. And he can better explain some of this stuff in a more in depth way. And I can help kind of dumb it down for myself and others. So yeah, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the fundamentals of strength training, nutrition, in reference to mobility?
So nutrition first is the big one because I think many people miss this. I love that you bring up water because it doesn't it hydrates us, but water is more important for cell function and to create energy. A lot of people miss this, especially I even think some of my interns like you need water to break an ATP bond. Hence, if you have less water, you have less bonds breaking, along with other things, to pull fluid into cells, to take things away, to take metabolites away. Like that's the most important thing. And when you decrease water, because you're losing it because you're sweating, you also are losing electrolytes. Those play an important role of firing balance from electrical standpoints for your heart to beat to your brain sense to all this. Like that's why water is very important. I think it's great that you bring it up because I think people just are like, oh well, I just drink a bunch of water. Well, on the flip side, now we're seeing a lot of supplements with hydration focus. A lot of these these
Mm.
new, I hate to say it, Pedialyte with the gym bros. Like they think that drinking Pedialyte is going to help restore their electrolytes. Yeah, it will, but it's not the best. But I think that's more predictive of, hey, this is going to improve performance than just say like if we're lifting, right? If you're taking a intra workout supplement that might be more potassium, sodium favorable with water, it's probably better than some other pre-workout, right? Because like you're keeping hydrated and there's specific hydration levels that you need to hit every 20 minutes to make sure that your performances keep going. And usually it's 8 ounces every 20 minutes, depending on your sweat rate, depending on the temperature outside. But that's very key to increase performance. Now, on the other side, nutrition is, we're building a system. It's people think nutrition of fats, carbs, protein. I always kind of look at it more as if you're training, especially strength training, you need to rebuild the tendons, the muscles, the ligaments that you've just worked, your bones. When you put weight on, it signals your bones to say, hey, I need to be able to hold this next time. I need to grow. And what you put in your body next is going to be the building blocks of that. The same concept as you're building a house. If I'm building a house, am I going to show up with a sectional couch before the walls are even put up? And I think that's what people do sometimes when they come to nutrition. When it comes to strength training, they're like, well, I'm having all these protein shakes and doing all this creatine and all this other stuff. And I'm like, well, what's your base hydration status? What's the rest of your system look like? Are you putting in carbs for glycogen synthesis? All that stuff. Usually people aren't doing that and they're going with the supplement route first, but the supplements aren't going to work unless you have the walls built on your house. So nutrition is
Well,
a very key aspect.
absolutely, and that's usually what's promoted to us, right? That's usually what we're sold on when we're in that kind of desperation state. I mean, it's really sad, but I hate the supplement industry. I hate how much is pushed on people and promoted to people and not educated on bioavailability or the reality of how their body's actually processing things when it's in a powder form versus when it's in its real food form and you bite into it because digestion starts in the mouth and enzyme production starts in the mouth. So when you start actually eating food again versus just all these proteins and pills, you're going to actually get benefits from the stuff you're eating versus like anywhere from 15 to 30% absorption. You're essentially with supplements, you're making really expensive stool. And you're being sold by this pie in the sky idea that you need these things in order for your body to operate. And the fact of the matter is you don't. There's so many ways that you can get what you need without needing to buy their product. But that's how our society rolls, where we're much driven by desire or lack of what we have, and it's the more probably it's one of the largest money makers in the fitness industry is the supplement side of things.
Mhm.
And I think a major thing I just want to add on to what Eric's talking about muscles, ligaments, tendons. That's the reason. That's another point for why mobility is so important, because if I have poor mobility to a certain area, if I have really bad tightness or restrictions in a certain area, it means I have terrible blood flow. And if I have terrible blood flow through each one of those pathways to my bone, to my ligaments, to my tendons, to my muscles, then I'm not going to repair tissue accordingly, and I'm not going to get new resources in that area to prepare me for the next workout. So that's why it's just another point for mobility, and why that's
Mhm.
another foundational piece and a fundamental to strength training and getting results from the stuff you do in the gym. And again, another reason why you want to break away. If mobility is so important, you want to break away from isolating, because you're going to create compensations in your body. You need to be able to work your whole system together. I think the hands down the best assessment piece for anybody is an overhead squat. If I can watch you do an overhead squat with a dowel or with a barbell, I can right away tell you what's wrong with your system, or how great you are, and you're good to go. And I think that's a good place for people to start, if they're in the comfort of their own home, or they're managing their own programs, or they're training their family, whatever. Test your mobility of your system and its ability to handle an overhead squat.
And I start to like not like the word mobility because I think people get it confused with flexibility. And
Mm,
it is a great word, but I think it's get confused because when people think mobility, they're like, oh, well, mobility is more like yoga or Pilates, which yeah, you're correct. But I kind of look at it as mobility is the ability to move through space or a joint through move through its full range of motion to accomplish a task. And we're talking isolation movements, like they are good, but people stay there too much. It's
mm,
the same
mm,
thing where people sit in a chair all day at work. You need to move through full range, full excursion of your full body. Like that's why overhead squat's good, because you're moving through shoulder joints, through hip joints, through knee, through ankle to see
ankle,
where the
yep.
limitations are. If you're sitting on a leg press, that leg press is not going to do anything when you're upright walking or running. Like I think that's the other thing that when it comes to strength training is yeah, machines are good, but there's no translation over into the real world. Like no one's ever going to be sitting on a leg press walking that way. No bicep curls. Yeah, everyone likes bicep curls. We do them, but especially if you're outside the general pop and you're an athlete, like you should not be spending your time here because you're going to actually deter your athletic performance. On the rehab continuum, we see this a lot with ACL patients. They do all this great rehab, but they just spent all their time strengthening quads on a seated leg extension, but their foot's never on the ground. So when they get up to a
Mm,
lunge or a single leg hop, their brain's not ready for it. That's why things like you mentioned earlier, full body movements, jumping, squatting, deadlifting, any sort of clean variation is the best thing that you can do or to learn, whether general pop or athlete, to have your system start to integrate what your hands, your arms, your feet, your legs are all doing at the same time, because that's what walking is. That's what running is. That's what, bending down to pick up laundry, a child is. It's all movement at the same time. And I think the industry has gotten very used to that because of people like Arnold and the bodybuilders. Over the years, they saw you can get really big on machines, but it's at the end of the day, remember, they were on steroids and all these other drugs, but it's not like optimal for function.
No, because if we're talking about bodybuilding, there's definitely an inverse relationship to bodybuilding and longevity. Now, don't get me wrong; they still look great, and if that's your overall goal to just get as big as possible, have at it. But usually that leads people to go down a road where they're also injecting synthetic hormones, and we know how that plays a role in um, basically accelerating growth, which also accelerates the growth of precancerous cells and cancerous cells and other damaging cells. So it's not the best for longevity. It's not even the best for performance. We've definitely seen over the years of how strength athletes and Olympic athletes in general can outperform, say, a bodybuilder or even a power lifter.
And that's because they live on a different spectrum. And I think this is
Right.
where the most important thing to go with this next is, bodybuilders live, most of them, some of them have lived in low rep ranges. They live in high rep ranges. So they're going to live in 10 plus reps. Their goal is to put on the most hypertrophy size as possible, right? And they're mainly targeting over the course type 1 muscle fibers. And then you have on the flip side, you have like people like Olympic lifters, power lifters. They're on the more type 2 fiber training types because they're moving weight really, really fast or really, really heavy. And you're seeing the same, a different kind of hypertrophy, but the mechanisms are different. That's why power lifters and Olympic lifters, some of them can lift more pound per pound than a bodybuilder can. And I think that's the next strength training is what fiber types are you looking to change? Because people don't understand that doing 10 plus reps versus under 10 reps is a completely different road to take.
I would actually argue that powerlifting hits a little bit type 1 muscle fiber as well, just because sometimes when they get to those submaximal weights, those maximal loads, they're actually moving them kind of slow versus like an Olympic lifter who moves with speed throughout everything they do. But that's splitting hairs. That's splitting hairs a little bit, and we don't need to get into that.
It's good because once you get to max load, that's type 2. So there's on the Hennon and size principle, it's either if you're moving lightweight really, really fast, you're in type 2. But if you're moving a maximum amount of weight, that's still type 2 at a slower force. It's still type 2. So they are still type 2, like on the spectrum. Now, of course, they're all fiber types are working at the same time because type 1's more of your aerobic fiber types. Type 2 are your more anaerobic. But, depending on what powerlifter is doing, if it's sub-max, yeah, they might be, depending on the percentage, right? If they're usually over 80% of someone's max, you are in type 2 fiber type training. And that's where we kind of look at for training some athletes on the strength continuum is like 80% or more for type 2. And then when we bring them into more explosive and speed, then I bring them into about 65 to no more than probably 75% of their max. And we're moving weight really fast. That's another type of type 2, which is boom. And that's where Olympic lifters usually stay. Now they kind of bounce back and forth because you might go for cleans and snatches. I'm explosive. Then you do some heavy deadlifting, for 1 or 2 reps or singles or doubles. That's still type 2. And that's how that continuum spins it together. But on the speed aspect, powerlifters won't be able to move that fast like Olympic lifters. That's where they lack the ability.
And I would say this in terms of the relationship to performance and longevity is with Olympic lifters, they're constantly working on improving the elasticity of a muscle fiber. And with powerlifters, they're constantly trying to improve the stiffness of their muscle fibers. So you can just see some of these powerlifters as they age, they don't have great mobility. Whereas an Olympic lifter, as long as they're still balanced in their programming, they can maintain really good mobility and be able to squat ass to grass, things like that. That I think will play a role later in life for them to have better longevity and better function of their system without like joint pain, things like that. That
And
was
that's
just
what it
my
comes.
point I was going to bring up. But
Yeah,
the other
when it comes to that, look at that, right? So you do have in the general population, we've seen people that are power lifters. Oh, I'm going to come and lift heavy every single day, and they can't find range of motion. And you have the people that are more on the Olympic lifting type. Maybe they don't do those movements, but they have the ability to move through space, and they change their rep ranges up. They change their exercises up, and I think that's where it comes to strength training for general population. Is people need to lie more on the spectrum of, yeah, you can go high reps, you can go low reps, you can go heavyweight, but you can't stay on one end. You can't stay at heavyweight forever because that will beat someone's
right,
body down to pulp. And your body's
totally.
right. To handle heavier weight, I just have to be more rigid, rigid, rigid. Power lifters literally just have 3 lifts: deadlift, squat, and bench. And it's all sagittal plane. That's it. That's all their life is. That's
And
not what
and
general people's lives are.
And just to your point, another side of that is in most Olympic lifting programs, a lot of the days are more concentric lifting. There might be some exercises in there that are a little bit of eccentric lifting, but if you look at like a powerlifting program, it's all including eccentrics. You're never just doing like a concentric lift. I mean, there are specific nuances where you might throw that in there once in a while, but more often than not, they're doing a lot of eccentric load throughout their program, throughout their weeks, and eventually it is like a little bit of an overtraining to deconditioning their system for a purpose. It's robbing Paul to pay Peter, so it's robbing their mobility so they can create better stiffness and be able to move that weight. They might still
Right.
be hitting type 2 muscle fibers, but still, when you see someone lifting like a 700-pound deadlift or an 800-pound squat or whatever, they're moving slowly through that the way versus watch an Olympic lifter throw 500 pounds overhead. You have to slow that thing down just so you can see what their body's doing. It happens that fast. But I wanted to come back to kind of the fundamental side. So we kind of like a step by step progression for people. You know, we talked about nutrition, we talked about mobility. I'd say the next fundamental we'd move into is overload, because if you're eating right, you're hydrated properly, you have good mobility, you're grabbing that barbell for the first time, the next step is to, with good technique, uh, overload your system in a way that's going to allow for adaptations and growth and progress. That's the goal, right? Everyone wants to see progress with the time they're spending in their gym, or they want to try to hold on to the progress they have, right? So the only way you do that is overload your system so that your body gets out of homeostasis, gets an allostasis stress level, and it has to adapt to that. And that's how you adjust that homeostatic level. Homeostasis is taking us here, and what we're doing is we're saying you're slowly going up with that homeostatic sine wave up and down. You want to talk a little bit more about overload principle?
Yeah, and this is overload. This is the basis of how you keep progressing through any program, any sort of life. We've all done it. If you're old enough or over 18, you've done it in school. Your teachers have done it to you. You just don't realize it from a learning standpoint. But it's overload is just like after 1 week or 2 weeks, you need to increase the stimulus. You need to increase something to change to get a different output. So when it comes to strength training, something very simple is you can either increase reps, you can add a set, you can increase the load, you can still keep the same weight, but move with better form for more of those sets. So let's say if you took 4 sets of 6 at 100 pounds on week 1, so week 2, if you were increasing the load, you would go to 105 for the next, try to get 4 sets or 3 sets. If you didn't increase the load but want to increase the reps, you go up to 7 reps. Then the next week, 8 reps. If you want to increase a set, you go 5 sets of 6. There's multiple ways to increase overload. because you're overall increasing efficiency of that movement. And it doesn't always have to be weight. And there's some times when people will put weight on bars, and I've done it, where you're like, I'm going to add 5 pounds, try to go every week. And you get that sticking point where like, I've been stuck at one weight for 2 weeks, and then you might see that jump the next couple of weeks, and that's how it goes. But on anything, you need to have that overload. And you see this a lot with runners, not a lot of strength athletes, because runners, I'm going to say this, novice runners, not advanced runners, because they know how to increase the load and kind of the mileage. But a lot of people will start, oh, I run 3 miles and I do that every day. And I've been doing that for a month. Well, after about a week or two of 3 miles, that 3 miles is not doing anything, because your body is using less calories to effectively get that distance, and you're not changing any sort of metabolic capacity. The same thing, if you look at miles as reps and set or total volume lifted strength training, it's the same. So you have to overload the system to increase whatever goals you are, right? You're trying to maintain muscle mass, you're trying to grow muscle mass, lose body fat. You need to have overload to keep your body progressively growing or burning calories to a new stimulus.
The other thing too is with overload, generally speaking, it's about 60 minutes or 25 reps before you're going to gas your nervous system, and you can possibly decondition your system. You can make yourself worse. So I think that's another thing to think about when you're thinking about your barbell work, you're thinking about your program, is 60 minutes. Like as soon as you touch that barbell, that timer's ticking, and 25 quality reps add up, 50 to 80% of your one rep max, so to speak, for creating an adaptation.
Mhm.
Everyone wants to just kind of overload their system every time they get into the gym. Law of diminishing returns will tell us that that won't work. That's going to eventually lead us to getting worse and worse performance. So if we want to overload our system, we want to overload it properly. We want to shoot for about 25 quality reps in a movement in order to get better at it. And then we want to think about the next step, and it's another fundamental of strength training, but they kind of go hand in hand: overload and then periodization. And we talk, people like linear periodization, especially in the beginning, of just maybe adding 5 pounds to their main lift every week. Sure, you can do that in the beginning, absolutely, until you get to a point where you're starting to plateau. And then you want to get into what we talk about on this channel, which is called undulating periodization. It's like the stock market, right? Check your favorite stocks or whatever, your portfolio. It's progress is non-linear. Everything goes up and down, but the goal is that growth overall has been happening. So I love the stock market. It's a great example because it goes up and down every single day, every single hour. But if you look at the last 150 years, it's been an average of like a 6% or 9%, somewhere between 6 and 9% growth overall in the last 150 years. So you've seen it go up, you've seen it go down, you've seen big spikes up and down. But the general trend is that there's been a growth pattern when you zoom out. That's the same thing with the way we periodize so we can overload our system in a safe way so that we're layering ourselves to get better and better throughout the weeks. So undulated periodization, just to kind of briefly give an example of it, would be, say you're doing an exercise, you do like 60 to 70% of your one rep max week one. Week two, you're going from 65 to 75. Week three, you're going from 55 to 65. And week four, you're going from 75 to 90 plus. And that's the idea.
Well, if Matt just froze, what he's saying is you're continuing undulating, so you're varying. And like the stock market system, I like how he mentioned. I was talking to a client about this the other day. If you want to play it safe, this is you put money into a fund that's going to grow slowly over time. You do slow progress, more linear. you kind of go from high reps to low reps over 12 months. Where undulating is if you put it into the stock market, highs and lows, you can get greater return, but there's a little bit more risk involved because of, the weights being used, right? And that's kind of how I look at strength training, is that return of investment. If you want to get a good return of investment, you're going to have to go and lift some heavy weights for some lower reps very often to get those bigger returns. Yes, there's more risk because the weight is heavier, but you're still training the system to your goal. And when it comes to strength training, everyone has goals. And if you don't have goals, you can always, message us and chat us to see what your goals are, where they might be, and how we can help you out with them. But if you have a goal to put on as much muscle mass as possible, you're going to lift some heavy weights, and then you're going to go into more volume work. I know he said for the big lifts like the squat, the deadlifts, the benches, the cleans. So you're going to go into a 25 rep maximum for quality at low reps. And this is probably going to be 6 reps or less on the spectrum. Now, if you're going to go for more hypertrophy, for more growth, then you can start ramping it up at, midway through the session. If you want to, do some